April 14th, 1945, the Ruhr Pocket near Iserlohn, Germany. The earth floor of the farmhouse cellar vibrates every 4 seconds. It isn't a tremble, it is a physical kick, a rhythmic violence that rattles the teeth in Obergefreiter Hans Weber's skull. Thump, whistle, crack. American artillery. 105mm howitzers, likely from the 99th Infantry Division, hammering the hillside above them. Hans sits with his back against a crate of damp potatoes that aren't really potatoes anymore, just sprouting black-skinned lumps of rot. He pulls his knees to his chest, his Wehrmacht tunic hanging loosely off a frame that has shed 30 pounds in 3 months. The wool is stiff with dried mud and the sour, metallic reek of unwashed fear. Across the cellar, Lieutenant Fischer is trying to clean his Luger by the light of a flickering kerosene lamp. His hands are shaking, not from fear, but from the low blood sugar that makes the whole world look gray and washed out. "They will run out of shells soon," Fischer mutters, his voice cracking. "Supply lines. They're overextended. The Fuhrer promised the new jet fighters would cut their supply lines." Hans doesn't answer. He knows better. He looks at the tin cup in his hands. Inside is the last of their coffee, a grim slurry of roasted acorns, chicory, and hot water. It tastes like burnt dirt. It offers no caffeine, no warmth, no comfort. It is just brown water meant to trick the stomach into thinking it has been fed. To his left, Private Jürgen, a boy who turned 17 only a week ago, is scraping the inside of a tin can with a dirty fingernail. It held horse-meat stew 2 days ago. There is nothing left, but Jürgen scrapes anyway, a compulsive, rhythmic scratching that competes with the artillery outside. "Stop it," Hans hisses. "I'm hungry, Obergefreiter," Jürgen whispers, his eyes huge and hollow, in a face smudged with soot. "We are all hungry," Hans snaps, then softens. He reaches into his bread bag, the Brotbeutel, and pulls out a heel of Kommissbrot. The army bread is 3 weeks old. It is dark, dense, and flecked with sawdust, a filler ingredient the bakeries in Dortmund started using when the flour ran out. It is hard enough to break a window. Hans breaks a piece off, the crust snapping like plywood, and hands it to the boy. "Chew it slowly. Make it last." This is the reality of the Third Reich's final stand. Starvation. The logistical spine of the German army has not just snapped, it has disintegrated. For months, the propaganda broadcasts from Joseph Goebbels have hammered one message into their heads. The Americans are air gangsters. They are culturally bereft barbarians. And most importantly, they are suffering just as much as Germany. Goebbels claimed the U-boats had starved England and America. He claimed the Allied soldiers were fighting on empty stomachs, driven only by Jewish commissars and greed. Hans believed it because he had to. If the enemy was starving too, then this suffering was just the nature of war. Crump. A shell lands close. Dust cascades from the ceiling beams, coating their soup bowls in a fine gray powder. "They are coming," Fischer says, holstering his weapon. He stands up, adjusting his belt. It's cinched to the last hole. "Fix bayonets." Hans looks at the officer. He looks at Jürgen, who is gnawing on the sawdust bread like a rodent. "With respect, Lieutenant," Hans says, remaining seated. "We have 12 rounds of ammunition between us. We haven't eaten a hot meal since March. If we go out there, we don't die for Germany. We die for nothing." Fischer draws his pistol. For a second, the tension in the cellar is deadlier than the shelling outside. Then, the lieutenant's shoulders sag. The fanaticism drains out of him, replaced by the crushing weight of biological imperative. He is simply too hungry to kill his own men. "Flag," Fischer whispers. "Find something white." 30 minutes later, the shelling stops. The silence that follows is deafening. It rings in the ears. Hans steps out of the farmhouse ruins first, his hands clasped behind his head. The daylight hurts his eyes. The air smells of cordite, wet pine, and rotting cattle. At the bottom of the hill, the Americans are waiting. They don't look like the monsters from the posters. They look like giants. They are sitting on the hulls of Sherman tanks, chewing gum, smoking cigarettes that smell sweet and rich. Virginia tobacco, not the harsh, weed-like hay Hans is used to. A huge American sergeant, standing nearly 6'4", walks up to them. He holds a Thompson submachine gun loosely in one hand. He looks at the scrawny, trembling Germans. He doesn't scream. He doesn't strike them with the butt of his rifle. He looks bored. All right, Fritz, the sergeant says in English, motioning with his head. Toss the gear in the pile. Keep moving. Hans drops his Mauser rifle. It clatters onto a heap of discarded steel. As he walks past the tank, he sees something that stops him cold. Sitting on the fender of the tank is an open cardboard box. Inside are wax paper cartons. The American tank crew is eating lunch. One of them is holding a tin of meat, actual meat, pink and fatty, and eating it with a spoon. Another is drinking from a canteen cup that steams with the smell of real coffee. But it's the trash that catches Hans's eye. Lying in the mud, trampled by a combat boot, is a wrapper, a Hershey's tropical chocolate bar. Half of the bar is still inside, crushed into the dirt. Hans stares at it. Chocolate. Real cocoa. Discarded. Wasted. In the Wehrmacht, a bar of chocolate is currency. It buys favors, silence, even safety. A bar of chocolate is a Christmas ration, a rare treasure sent from home in the early years of the war. And here, these Americans drop it in the mud because they simply don't want to finish it. Move it, a GI says, nudging Hans. Hans keeps walking, but his mind is reeling. The propaganda said the Americans were starving. The propaganda said their supply lines were cut. They are herded into a temporary holding pen, a fenced-off meadow filled with 2,000 other prisoners. The ground is turning to slush under the boots of the defeated army. Night falls, and the temperature drops. Hans huddles with Jürgen for warmth. They expect the usual treatment, interrogation, maybe a beating, and then a long march to a starvation camp. Instead, a truck roars up to the gate. It's a terrifyingly large vehicle, a deuce and a half, its engine idling with a throaty, powerful rumble that speaks of unlimited gasoline. American soldiers begin tossing boxes off the back. "Chow line!" someone shouts in broken German. "Form up!" Hans stumbles forward, clutching his mess tin. He reaches the front of the line. An American cook, wearing a pristine white apron over his fatigues, a white apron in the middle of a war zone, ladles something into his tin. It isn't watery soup. It is a thick orange stew. Meat and vegetable hash. There are chunks of beef, actual potatoes, carrots. And next to it, the cook slaps a heavy, dense biscuit and a packet of powdered lemonade. Hans stares at the food. The heat radiating from the tin warms his face. He looks at the cook, waiting for the catch, waiting for the trick. "Go on, buddy," the cook grunts. "Next." Hans stumbles back to where Jürgen is sitting. They eat in silence. The first bite is overwhelming. The salt, the fat, the protein. It hits Hans's system like a drug. His stomach cramps violently, unaccustomed to real food, but he keeps eating. "They have so much," Jürgen whispers, his mouth full of hash. "Hans, look at the trucks. Look at the boxes. There are mountains of them." Hans looks past the wire. He sees a convoy of trucks stretching back to the horizon. Fuel tankers, ammo trucks, food trucks. A river of steel and rubber flowing east without end. He thinks of the horse meat soup. He thinks of the sawdust bread. He thinks of Goebbels screaming on the radio about the weakness of the plutocracies. And for the first time, the true scale of the lie becomes physical. It isn't just that they lost the battle. Hans looks at the half-eaten biscuit in his hand and realizes something far more terrifying. They never had a chance. The Americans didn't just bring guns to Europe. They brought a grocery store, and they brought it across an ocean. "Eat up, Jürgen," Hans says quietly, a profound, crushing sadness settling over him. "We are going to America." The boy's eyes widen. "Will they kill us there?" Hans scrapes the last bit of fat from his tin. "No, I don't think so. I think they have too much food to bother killing us." May 5th, 1945. The North Atlantic. Aboard the Liberty ship SS Jeremiah O'Brien. The world has narrowed to the rhythmic, heaving gray of the Atlantic Ocean and the stifling steel gut of the SS Jeremiah O'Brien. 3 decks down, in what used to be cargo hold number 4, the air is thick enough to chew. It smells of unwashed bodies, 400 German prisoners packed into canvas hammocks stacked 4 high, diesel fumes, and the pervasive, salty damp of the sea. Hans Weber lies on a middle bunk, staring at the rivets in the steel plate 6 inches from his nose. His stomach is no longer cramping from starvation. Instead, it feels strange, heavy, and full. "Move up! Schnell!" an American MP shouts from the gangway. "Chow time! Let's go! Let's go!" The prisoners swing their legs out of the hammocks. They are a ghost army. Tunics stripped of insignia, boots scuffed, faces gaunt. But the hollow, skeletal look of the Ruhr pocket is already fading, replaced by the bloating of men suddenly introduced to unlimited calories. Hans joins the line, shuffling toward the galley. Beside him, Lieutenant Fischer is still wearing his officer's cap, though the eagle has been ripped off. Fischer's face is tight with a new kind of misery. It isn't hunger anymore. It is humiliation. "Watch them," Fischer whispers to the men around him. "Do not gorge yourselves. It is a trick. They feed us to make us docile. It is the same principle as fattening a pig before the slaughter." Hans ignores him. He is focused on a smell drifting down the corridor. It is a scent that shouldn't exist in 1945. Not in Europe. Not for a soldier. It smells of yeast. Warm, rising dough. Sweetness. They enter the mess deck. It is a utilitarian steel box, loud with the clatter of trays. But to Hans, it looks like a cathedral. The serving line is staffed by American Navy cooks. They wear t-shirts and white caps. They look impossibly healthy. Their arms are thick, their skin clear. They don't look like men who have spent 5 years rationing potato peels. Hans picks up a metal tray. He moves down the line. Slop. A ladle of scrambled eggs drops onto the metal. Not the gray, powdered egg substitute the Wehrmacht issued in 1944, but bright yellow, fluffy eggs. Clang. 2 sausages. Actual pork. Grease glistening on the casing. Splash. Coffee. Black, oily, and smelling of actual roasted beans from Brazil or Colombia, not the acrid stench of burnt acorns. But then comes the bread. The baker, a young sailor with a tattoo of an anchor on his forearm, reaches into a crate and pulls out a slice. He drops it onto Hans's tray. It is white, not gray, not brown. It is a blinding, snowy white. It is perfectly square, soft, and spongy. Hans stares at it. In Germany, white bread, Weissbrot, was a luxury for the rich or the high command, and even then, it was dense. This looks like cake. "Move it, Fritz," the baker says, tossing a pat of yellow butter, onto the bread. Hans stumbles to a table and sits down next to Jürgen. The boy is already eating, shoving the eggs into his mouth with a frantic, animalistic speed. "Slow down," Hans cautions, though his own hands are trembling. "You'll get sick again." He picks up the slice of white bread. It feels impossibly light, like holding a cloud. He presses his thumb into the center. The bread springs back. "It's cotton," Fischer sneers from across the table. The officer is picking at his sausages with suspicion. "It's chemical filler. No army can afford to feed prisoners refined wheat. It's impossible." Hans takes a bite. The taste is shocking. It is sweet. The texture is soft, requiring almost no chewing. It melts on the tongue, mixing with the salt of the butter. It tastes of peace. It tastes of a world where harvest reports don't matter, where grain silos are bursting, where milling machines run 24 hours a day without fear of bombing. "It's bread, Lieutenant," Hans says quietly. "It's just white bread." "It's a lie!" Fischer slams his hand on the table, startling a nearby guard. "Don't you see? They are showing us this to break our will. They want us to believe they have infinite resources. It is a stage set." Hans looks around the mess hall. He sees the trash cans at the end of the line. He watches a prisoner dump a half-eaten sausage into the bin because he is too full to finish it. "If it is a trick," Hans says, dipping the bread into the coffee, "it is a very expensive one." Later that afternoon, the prisoners are allowed up on deck for exercise. The fresh air hits them like a hammer after the stench of the hold. The Jeremiah O'Brien is plowing through a heavy swell. Hans walks to the railing, gripping the cold steel. He looks out at the horizon, and his breath stops. He had thought they were alone, but they are not alone. The ocean is crowded. Stretching as far as the eye can see, in every direction, are ships. Liberty ships, victory ships, tankers, destroyers. It is a convoy of steel so vast it seems to pave the Atlantic. To the port side, a tanker rides low in the water, heavy with millions of gallons of aviation fuel. To the starboard, another Liberty ship, identical to the one Hans is standing on, crashes through the waves. Its deck is stacked high with crates. Not just crates, trucks, jeeps, ambulances, lashed to the deck because the holds are already full. "Mein Gott," Jürgen whispers, standing beside him. Hans tries to count them. 10, 20, 50. He stops at 80. There are simply too many. In the Wehrmacht, a truck was a precious thing. You cannibalized 3 to keep one running. You siphoned fuel from a disabled tank to run a courier motorcycle. Logistics was a desperate game of scarcity. But here the Americans are shipping entire parking lots across an ocean. "Lieutenant," Hans calls out, not turning around. "Come look at the stage set." Fisher walks to the rail. He is silent. He grips the metal until his knuckles turn white. He is looking at a destroyer escort weaving through the convoy. It isn't a U-boat. It is the Hunter. The German wolf packs are gone, or they are hiding. The ocean belongs to this convoy. "Look at the cargo on that one." Hans points to the ship, a beam of them. Through the mist, they can see the deck cargo of the neighboring ship. It is stacked with crates marked with the Red Cross, but also crates marked with commercial logos: Coca-Cola, Spam, Kellogg's. "They are bringing breakfast cereal to a war zone," Hans says, the absurdity of it making him want to laugh and cry at the same time. "We were fighting for turnips, and they are shipping cornflakes." Fisher turns away from the rail. His face is gray. The denial is cracking. You can fake a radio broadcast. You can fake a newspaper. You cannot fake 1,000 ships spanning the horizon, loaded with enough calories to feed the entire population of Berlin. "It doesn't matter," Fisher mutters, retreating back toward the hatch. "America is soft. They have things, yes, but they have no spirit. They will collapse." But Hans stays at the rail. He watches the foam churned up by the wake of the Jeremiah O'Brien. He thinks of the white bread in his stomach. He thinks of the butter. He realizes then that the war wasn't decided by the Tiger tank or the Messerschmitt jet. It was decided by the bakery. It was decided by the fact that the Americans could bake white bread for their prisoners, while the Germans were adding sawdust to the rations of their own troops. The wind picks up, cold and biting, but Hans doesn't shiver. He is full. "Jürgen," Hans says softly, "when we get to America, I think I'm going to try the ice cream." "Ice cream?" Jürgen asks, his eyes wide. "You think they have it?" Hans looks at the endless convoy, a river of steel flowing effortlessly toward Europe. "Yes," Hans says, "I think they have everything." May 18th, 1945, Boston Harbor, Massachusetts. The morning fog lifts slowly, peeling back like a gray curtain to reveal a world that shouldn't exist. Hans Weber stands on the deck of the Jeremiah O'Brien, crowded by hundreds of other prisoners. They are silent. Not the disciplined silence of the parade ground, nor the fearful silence of the front line. It is the silence of men who are seeing a ghost. Ahead of them lies the city of Boston. For 3 years, Hans has known only cities that look like skeletons. Cologne, Hamburg, Berlin. They are landscapes of jagged brick, twisted rebar, and hollowed-out facades. They are gray, brown, and black. But Boston is whole. "Look at the glass," Jürgen whispers, gripping the railing until his knuckles are white. "Hans, look at the windows." Hans follows the boy's gaze. It isn't just the buildings, solid, brick, unscarred. It's the glass. Every window in every warehouse, factory, and home is intact. They glint in the morning sun like diamonds. In Germany, glass is a memory. Plywood and cardboard cover the eyes of every building. "No craters," Hans murmurs. "Not one." The ship glides past the Navy Yard. It is a beehive of industrial violence. Cranes swing massive turret assemblies. Sparks shower from welding torches. Destroyers are lined up 3 deep, freshly painted, bristling with guns. But unlike the frantic, desperate repairs of the German shipyards, this feels rhythmic, orderly. "It is untouched," Lieutenant Fisher says, his voice sounding thin and brittle. He is standing apart from the men, staring at a massive neon sign for a brewery on the waterfront. Goebbels said the Luftwaffe had struck the East Coast. He said New York and Boston were burning. "The radio lied, Lieutenant," Hans says, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. "There is no fire. There is no blackout." That night, as they are processed off the ship and marched toward the rail yard, the realization hits harder. The city isn't just standing, it is alive with light. Street lamps hum. Store windows glow with electricity. Cars, hundreds of civilian automobiles, move along the roads with their headlights on full beam. "They waste electricity," Fisher sneers, trying to find a flaw. "It is decadent." "It is freedom," Hans counters quietly. "They don't fear the sky. They are loaded onto a train. But this is not the Deutsche Reichsbahn. There are no cattle cars smelling of straw and urine. These are Pullman coaches. They have upholstered seats, green velvet. There are glass windows that open. There is a water cooler at the end of the car with paper cups, to be used once and thrown away. As the train lurches forward, clattering over the switches, the prisoners press their faces to the glass. They are heading west, toward the interior, to the camps. May 19th, 1945. Passing through upstate New York/Pennsylvania. The landscape rolls by. It is a lush, vibrant green, but it is the towns that break them. They pass through a small industrial town. A factory sits near the tracks, smoke pouring from its stacks. It looks like a tank factory, or maybe an aircraft plant. Look at the parking lot, a sergeant named Muller points out. The lot outside the factory is paved, and it is full. Hundreds of cars, Fords, Chevrolets, Plymouths. They gleam in the sun. The officers must be having a meeting, Fisher rationalizes, squinting at the cars. Only the high command or party officials would have vehicles like that. Hans shakes his head. Lieutenant, look at the shift change. The whistle blows. Men in blue coveralls carrying lunch pails stream out of the factory gates. They don't walk to a bus stop or a tram. They walk to the cars. They unlock them, start the engines, and drive away. The train car goes dead silent. In Germany, a private car is a myth. Gasoline is liquid gold, reserved for the Wehrmacht. A factory worker rides a bicycle or walks. Here, a man who tightens bolts on a tank drives his own car to work, burning gasoline as if it were water. Every worker has a car, Jürgen asks, his voice trembling. Is everyone in America a millionaire? No, Hans says, the weight of the revelation settling in his chest. They are just normal. This is normal for them. The train slows as it passes a siding. A freight train is moving in the opposite direction, headed east toward the ports. It is endless. Flat car after flat car loaded with Sherman tanks, then boxcars. The doors of one are slid open for ventilation. Inside, stacked floor to ceiling, are crates of oranges. Hans remembers his last Christmas leave in 1943. He had paid a week's wages for a single, shriveled orange for his mother. She had wept over it. And here, a train is carrying millions of them, rattling past a prison train without a second thought. Fisher turns away from the window. He sits down heavily on the velvet seat. He pulls his cap down over his eyes. It's too much, the officer whispers. It's too much. Hans watches him. He sees the lieutenant's worldview collapsing. The Nazi ideology was built on the idea of struggle, of scarcity, of the triumph of the will against a starving world. But there is no struggle here. There is only abundance. The Americans didn't win because they were better soldiers, Hans realizes. They didn't win because they were racially superior. They won because they could put a car in every driveway and a chicken in every pot and then build 10,000 tanks on top of it. Hans, Jürgen nudges him. The guard, he's eating again. At the end of the car, a young MP is reading a comic book. He has a bag of peanuts and a bottle of Coca-Cola. He eats absently, turning the page, not even looking at the food. Hans feels a pang of hunger, not for the food itself. He is still full from the ship, but for the casualness of it. The freedom to eat without thinking, to live without calculating the calories. We are going to be okay, Jürgen, Hans says, leaning his head back against the soft seat. We lost the war, but look out that window. Outside, a farmer on a tractor waves at the train. A field of corn stretches to the horizon, green and tall. We lost, Hans says, closing his eyes. But I think we landed in heaven. May 22nd, 1945. Camp Concordia, Kansas. The heat in Kansas is different from the damp chill of the Ruhr. It is a dry, shimmering wall that rises from the endless fields of wheat surrounding the camp. The air smells of dust, tractor diesel, and something impossibly sweet, alfalfa. Hans steps off the truck, his boots crunching on gravel. He looks up at the guard tower. It is manned by a teenager with a rifle, leaning casually against the railing, chewing gum. The wire fence is there, yes, but beyond it, farmers are working the fields. There are no ruined cities, no craters, just a horizon that goes on forever. Form up, a sergeant shouts. Barracks assignment. The prisoners shuffle into lines. They are no longer the ragged scarecrows captured in Germany. They have been showered, deloused, and issued clean blue denim fatigues with PW stenciled in white on the back. Lieutenant Fisher stands next to Hans. He is clean-shaven now, but his eyes are still darting around, looking for the trap. "Look at the barracks," Fisher whispers, gesturing to the rows of wooden buildings. They are raised off the ground. Ventilation, screened windows. "It keeps the mosquitoes out," Hans notes, admiring the construction. "It is soft," Fisher sneers. "A soldier sleeps in the mud. This is a holiday camp." But the real shock waits in Building 4, the mess hall. It is noon. The sun is blazing overhead. The prisoners are marched inside. The heat vanishes, replaced by the hum of industrial fans moving the air. The smell hits them instantly, frying chicken. Not the stringy, boiled horse meat of the Eastern Front, but deep-fried, batter-crusted chicken. They pick up their trays. The metal is warm. Hans moves down the line. A scoop of mashed potatoes, a ladle of gravy, a drumstick the size of his fist, green beans that are bright green, not gray mush. And then, at the end of the line, sits a large, gleaming silver machine. A cook stands next to it. He isn't holding a ladle. He is holding a scoop. "Ice cream?" the cook asks, bored. "Vanilla or chocolate?" Hans freezes. The line behind him stops. "Ice cream?" Hans repeats in English, the word feeling alien in his mouth. "Yeah, buddy, ice cream. It's hot outside. Take it." The cook scoops a perfect sphere of white vanilla into a small metal bowl on Hans's tray. It begins to melt slightly at the edges, a creamy white pool forming against the stainless steel. Hans walks to a table, his legs feeling weak. He sits down. Jürgen slides in next to him, staring at his own bowl of chocolate as if it were a live grenade. "It's cold," Jürgen whispers, hovering his hand over the bowl. "How is it cold? We are in the middle of a desert." Hans picks up his spoon. The metal is cool to the touch. He takes a small bite of the vanilla. The shock is physical. The cold hits the roof of his mouth, sending a sharp ache behind his eyes. Then comes the sugar, the cream. It is rich, smooth, and utterly unnecessary. In the Wehrmacht, food was fuel. You ate to march. You ate to kill. You ate to not die. But ice cream is frivolous. It serves no tactical purpose. It requires refrigeration trucks. It requires dairy herds that aren't being slaughtered for meat. It requires sugar that isn't being rationed for explosives. To give ice cream to a prisoner, to an enemy, is the ultimate flex of power. Across the table, Lieutenant Fisher is staring at his bowl. He hasn't touched his chicken. He is just staring at the melting vanilla scoop. "They are mocking us," Fisher hisses, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. "Do you see? They are showing us that they can waste this. They have so much energy, so much fuel, that they can freeze milk in the middle of summer and give it to the men who killed their friends." "Eat it, Lieutenant," Hans says softly. "It will melt." "I cannot." Fisher slams his spoon down. "It is obscene. My wife in Hamburg is boiling shoe leather for soup, and I am sitting here eating this?" Tears well up in the officer's eyes. He is a hardened veteran. He survived the retreat from Russia. He survived the bombing of Dresden. But the ice cream breaks him. It is the undeniable proof that the German sacrifice was not just in vain, but pitifully small compared to the American giant. Hans looks around the mess hall. 400 German soldiers are eating in silence. There is no bravado, no talk of the master race. There is only the sound of spoons scraping bowls. He sees a young corporal from Bavaria licking his spoon with a look of pure, childlike ecstasy. He sees a sergeant weeping silently into his mashed potatoes. Hans takes another bite. The sweetness is almost painful. "Jürgen," Hans says, looking at the boy, "do you remember the speeches about the weak, decadent Americans?" "Yes," Jürgen says, wiping chocolate from his lip. "They weren't weak," Hans says, gesturing with his spoon at the bustling kitchen, the endless trays of food, the fans spinning overhead. "They were just waiting. And while we were marching, they were building this." He looks at Fisher, who has finally picked up his spoon, defeated. The officer takes a bite, swallows, and then closes his eyes. The fight leaves him. The Nazi ideology, built on the worship of struggle and scarcity, dissolves in the face of a single scoop of vanilla. "It is good," Fisher whispers, his voice broken. God help us. It is good. Hans finishes his bowl. He scrapes the bottom, getting every last drop of the melted cream. He feels full. He feels safe. For the first time in 6 years, he doesn't wonder if he will live to see tomorrow. He looks out the window at the Kansas wheat fields, swaying in the wind. We didn't just lose the war, Jurgen, Hans says, pushing his tray away. We never even knew who we were fighting. October 12th, 1946, Frankfurt am Main, Germany. The wind in Frankfurt tastes different than the wind in Kansas. In Kansas, the wind tasted of wheat and diesel. Here, it tastes of wet ash, pulverized brick, and the sour, ancient damp of a cellar that has been cracked open to the sky. Hans Weber walks down what used to be the Zeil, the main shopping street. It is now a canyon of rubble. Twisted tram rails stick out of the mud like broken ribs. A woman in a headscarf pulls a wooden cart piled with scavenged coal, her face gray with exhaustion. He adjusts the strap of his duffel bag. He is wearing his old Wehrmacht greatcoat, dyed a dark civilian blue, but the fabric is thin. Yet, beneath it, Hans is different. His shoulders are broader. His chest is thick. He has spent 18 months in America, eating 3 hot meals a day, drinking milk, and working the harvest in the sun. He is 20 pounds heavier than the ghost who surrendered in the Ruhr pocket. Beside him walks Jurgen. The boy has grown 3 inches. He looks almost like an American teenager now, taller, straighter, his cheeks flushed with health. But as they pick their way through the ruins of their homeland, that health feels like a heavy, awkward coat. They are well-fed men walking through a graveyard of skeletons. It's gone, Jurgen whispers, stopping in front of a heap of stones that was once the opera house. All of it. Just gone. It will be rebuilt, Hans says, though he doesn't truly believe it. The scale of the destruction is absolute. They reach the neighborhood of Bornheim. Hans's heart hammers against his ribs. He hasn't heard from his parents in 2 years. The mail service from the camps was spotty, and many letters simply vanished into the chaos of the occupation. He finds the street. The corner bakery is a shell, its roof collapsed, but the apartment block next to it is standing, damaged, scarred with shrapnel, but standing. He climbs the stairs. The railing is gone, used for firewood, presumably. He knocks on the door of number 4. It opens slowly. A woman stands there. She is thin, painfully so. Her eyes are sunken, her skin papery. It takes Hans a moment to realize this is his mother. She looks 20 years older. Mutti, he whispers. She drops the rag she is holding. She stares at him, at his round face, his clear eyes, the sheer life radiating off him. She touches his cheek with a trembling hand, as if he were a hallucination. Hans? She chokes out. You are so big. He hugs her, and he feels every bone in her back. The guilt hits him like a physical blow. While she was boiling nettles for soup, he was eating fried chicken in a mess hall in Kansas. While she was shivering in a cellar, he was complaining about the humidity in a heated barrack. Later, they sit around the small table. His father is there too, a shadow of the man he was, coughing into a handkerchief. They stare at the items Hans pulls from his duffel bag, a tin of Spam, a bar of Hershey's chocolate, a pack of Camel cigarettes, a pair of nylon stockings. They look at these objects as if they are holy relics. The Americans gave you this? His father asks, his voice raspy. In the prison? Yes, Hans says. He opens the Spam. The smell of salty, preserved meat fills the room, overpowering the smell of damp plaster. His mother begins to weep silently. Tell us, she says, wiping her eyes. Tell us what it was like. Hans looks at Jurgen, who is sitting in the corner, chewing on a piece of dark German bread that tastes like sawdust. He thinks about how to explain it, how to explain the silos bursting with grain, the traffic jams of Ford coupes, the Sunday dinners where families threw away more food than this entire apartment block ate in a week. It was... Hans starts, then stops. They have machines for everything, Mutti. Machines to milk the cows, machines to pick the corn. They don't have to choose between guns and butter. They have both. They have mountains of both. He remembers the ice cream, the cold, sweet shock of that first scoop in Camp Concordia. They have a dessert, Hans says softly, made of frozen milk and sugar. They give it to the soldiers. They gave it to us, just because they could. His father stares at him. Frozen milk? In the summer? Yes. His father shakes his head, a bitter, incredulous smile touching his lips. The Führer told us they were weak. He told us they were mongrels who couldn't fight. He looks at the tin of Spam, the solid, industrial proof of a supply chain that spanned an ocean. He lied. They were giants. Hans stands up and walks to the window. Down below, an American Jeep drives slowly past the ruins. 2 GIs are sitting in it, laughing. One of them tosses a stick of gum to a group of children playing in the rubble. The war is over. The shooting has stopped. But the real conquest is just beginning. It isn't a conquest of territory. It is a conquest of reality. The Americans didn't just defeat the Wehrmacht. They defeated the very idea of scarcity. Hans turns back to the room. He cuts a slice of the meat and hands it to his mother. "Eat," he says gently. "It's over now." He realizes then that the most powerful weapon the Americans possessed wasn't the atomic bomb or the B-29. It was the logistics. It was the unthinking, casual abundance that allowed a prisoner of war to eat better than a general in the Reich. Hans Weber survived the war, but as he watches his parents eat, he knows that the Germany he grew up in, the Germany of struggle, of rationing, of guns before butter, died the moment he tasted that vanilla ice cream. And in the silence of the ruined apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of a starved empire, Hans finally understands the lesson of the Atlantic. You cannot fight a nation that treats ice cream as a necessity of war.